Jesus, this is gonna be a long video. So, a couple weeks ago, I had finals at my school. Each period was like an hour and a half long, so periods that I didn't have finals in were kind of boring. I decided to make a Topster chart of my favorite albums, and I thought that was a pretty good topic for a video. So, get ready for pretension. Let's get into it. Dog, really? The first album on my list is the one I have the least to say about. These analytics aren't gonna be helped. So at 42, I have Back in Black by AC/DC. As I said before, I don't really have much to say about this album. It's just fun. It's 70s classic rock at its peak. I think some serious standouts include the title track, Hell's Bells, and You Shook Me All Night Long. Maybe part of that nostalgia is from my dad having the Sirius XM channel Classic Rewind on in the car all the time. But yeah, check it out. Man, I'm gonna get some flack for placing this so low. At 41, I have Abbey Road. As Beatles albums go, it's typically considered one of the best. I agree, but my favorite is farther up the list. Overall, this album has influenced almost all contemporary rock albums in some way. The production, the writing, and the performances overall are pretty incredible. Come Together is a fantastic opener with one of the most iconic bass lines ever made. Here Comes the Sun is beautifully upbeat, but not overwhelmingly cheesy, almost like a psychedelic children's song. But I think the biggest reason this is on my list is because of the production. Abbey Road is one of the first times the Beatles used 8-track recording instead of 4-track, which if you don't know what that means, multi-track recording is when you record multiple sound sources to later use as a whole. So 8-track recordings have 8 separate tracks. The Beatles also used the Moog synthesizer, which was an incredibly influential synth, being the first available commercially. We have our first original soundtrack on this list, and our first entry by Trent Reznor. The Quake soundtrack is sick. I love it. It might be my favorite power electronic album ever. The main theme slaps with an incredible ascending musical phrase that makes you want to play a 90s shoot 'em up. It then goes into serene ambient noise for 2.5 minutes. It's only an hour long, and even if you aren't a fan of instrumental music, I still recommend this album. At number 39, we have Selected Ambient Works 85 through 92. A mouthful, I know. This is my second favorite Aphex Twin album and an absolute staple in electronica. Ask any artist in the genre and they will probably say this was an inspiration. Hell, ask any artist from any genre and they will probably say this was an inspiration. What really is striking is how DIY the album is, with Richard David James using cheap, modified synthesizers and drum machines. He even used an Atari console to sequence the songs. Also, apparently the album sounds the way it does because the cassette used was damaged by his cat. Seriously, what the f***? Yankee Hotel Foxtrot is what happens when I ask indie friends of mine to make a post-rock album. It's great. The use of unusual instruments is incredibly unique to this album. From the opening, Wilco consumes you with this warm, nostalgic feeling that undercuts the sad lyrics. Wilco is a band I would not consider myself a huge fan of. They feel like a generic chill indie rock band most of the time, but I still enjoy this album. Not much to say, but I still really enjoy it. Bad Motorfinger is first of 2 albums on this list by Soundgarden. This album's pretty interesting. Soundgarden had not incorporated elements of psych rock that they used later, but they took a lot of elements from doom and sludge metal and noise rock. It strikes the perfect medium between their early album style of like doomy hard rock and punk, and their later sound of chuggy alt metal. Chris Cornell is at his peak performance-wise in these songs, reaching incredibly high notes in songs like Jesus Christ Pose, which was written criticizing televangelists for abusing the imagery of the passion for self-gain. These songs are very long too, clocking in around 6 or 7 minutes, but they feel more like 3 or 4. Highly recommend if you like early grunge music. I'm very new to this album. It's also one of the first ventures into hip-hop that I enjoyed. I found clipping through David Diggs, who raps on this album. He was in Hamilton, so that's where I know him from. Splendor and Misery incorporates elements of noise and industrial music into rap, making an experience I've never really had before. This album's themes delve into sci-fi and horror, adding a bit of the geekiness that I really find fun. As someone who doesn't really listen to hip-hop, listen to this album. Now for an album that is completely the opposite of the last entry, at 35 is Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. No matter how I feel about Axl Rose, I can't deny how good this album is. In the mid to late 80s, hair metal was one of the most popular genres, and to be honest, I kind of hate most of it. Guns N' Roses brought an edge that was missing in Motley Crue, Cinderella, and Poison. Especially Poison. Slash's guitar work is equally melodic as it is heavy, and the songwriting is fantastic. It was either this album or Use Your Illusion, but Use Your Illusion has My World. So that. Number 34 is Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park, and damn, this album is unique. I have never since heard such a flawless fusion of rap, metal, and pop music. It sounds kind of impossible. Nu metal has always kind of bugged me because much of it feels like an edgy 13-year-old who has first world issues, but this album has never really felt like that. Hybrid Theory also commercializes metal, which is pretty hard to do. The guitars are significantly down-tuned too, giving it a bit of an edge. I recommend the singles One Step Closer and In the End. The album is also 38 minutes long, so it won't take up much of your day. So the backstory to this album is pretty insane. In 2002, Green Day went into the studio to record a project called Cigarettes and Valentines. That November, the master tapes were stolen. They then went and made a completely new album. That's some serious work ethic. No matter what your political ideology is, you have to admit that there are some great protest songs on this album. American Idiot acts as a great opener, setting up the mid-2000s teenage angst feeling the album portrays. Wake Me Up When September Ends represents a mourning post 9/11, even though it wasn't really written about 9/11. It's a peak concept album. Also, as a theater kid, mad respect for the Broadway adaptation. The first of 4 entries of Radiohead's discography on this list, Moon-Shaped Pool clocks in at 32. God, this album is gorgeous. I'm not upset if this is the final Radiohead album because this feels like a statement about the mantra around the band. The album is sad, cold, but feels climactic in a way most Radiohead albums have not felt like before. It also displays how much Johnny Greenwood has grown as a composer. The orchestra arrangements are stunning and really shine through on tracks like the opener Burn the Witch. The album also takes inspiration from genres and styles they had not delved into before. Desert Island Disc is folky and acoustic in the best ways. Full Stop takes inspiration from early krautrock. It just feels new for Radiohead, even 24 years after their debut came out. Another reason I think this may be the final album by Radiohead is because of the closer. True Love Waits is the closer and had first been performed in 1995 but never recorded. That feels like a conclusive end if you ask me. I admit it, I'm not much of an emo fan. I have friends who are, but I feel like it projects an annoying Hot Topic style of crying right now because my mom made me get a job. This album is different. Black Parade is a concept album that incorporates elements of classic rock, musical theater, and more. And you know how much I love musical theater. But also, this album is super sad. I'm talking like depressing. It deals with fatal diseases, so if you aren't a fan of that subject matter, don't listen to this album. At number 30, we have Pinkerton by Weezer. I know what you're thinking. You put Pinkerton on this list, but not the Blue album? And to that, I say be patient. What I love about this album is the roughness and raw sound, while still sounding like classic Weezer. Although I'm not a fan of the weird incel-core lyrics about, like, Japanese women, it's an interesting juxtaposition to the nostalgic lyrics of the previous album. Lift your skinny fists like antennas to heaven, try saying that 3 times fast, is interesting. I wouldn't consider myself a huge fan of drone music, but this album is well composed. Godspeed You, Black Emperor is incredibly unique because they are more like a chamber orchestra instead of your traditional rock band of a guitar, bass, and drums. So songs feel more like suites and classical compositions than your normal post-rock song. That being said, if you are not a fan of long, drawn-out music, you will not stand this album. It's called drone music for a reason, guys. Now, this next album is just so much fun. At 20, we have Blood Sugar Sex Magic. This is where I think the Chili Peppers went from being a cheesy funk metal band to a more alternative rock-inspired band. It's a perfect medium that complements their California skater bro persona and more of an intricate sound. You have more of their traditional early tracks like Suck My Kiss and The Power of Equality, while having songs like the hit single Under the Bridge that sounds more like their late 90s, early 2000s discography. My favorite track from this album, however, is probably Breaking the Girl. It sounds like a cross between Simon and Garfunkel and a medieval magical, with acoustic guitars and flutes. Paranoid was the second album released by Black Sabbath, and what I believe to be their best. Black Sabbath essentially innovated metal, although it doesn't sound like early, more thrash-inspired metal. They made the dark, ominous themes that black metal and doom metal ran with. If you even remotely enjoy hard rock or metal, this is a must. A great cover I would suggest is Faith No More's version of War Pigs. It's very faithful, and also more upbeat, so if you like brighter funk metal music, check out that cover. Also, like T-Pain made a cover and that's actually pretty good. So, I mean, check that out too, I guess. Just to get this out of the way, Van Halen is my favorite band of all time. I know what you're thinking. Oh my god, r/Fantano members' favorite band is a party rock group? Yeah, for one, you. And two, part of it's nostalgia. And three, Eddie Van Halen is one of the most technically impressive guitarists of all time. May he rest in peace. So at 26 places Van Halen's self-titled record. From the start, this album is fun. It has one of the best 4-song runs. Running with the Devil introduces us to David Lee Roth's showmanship and Eddie Van Halen's unique shredding. Eruption / running / or you know what? Eruption / You Really Got Me Now as an iconic instrumental leading into one of the best covers of all time. Then Ain't Talking About Love is just a banger. However, this is not my favorite Van Halen album. Stay tuned. The second Trent Reznor project and the first 9 Inch Nails record on this list. The Fragile instills a melancholic, distant feeling other NIN albums do not. I feel an angry emptiness while listening to these songs. This was also one of the first times, besides the Quake soundtrack, that Reznor delved into instrumental music, and you would have thought he had been making this kind of music for 30 years. It's an incredible piece of art and an effective listen. I highly recommend it. Okay, I admit it, I like Coldplay. I know that's not a crazy hot take, like saying you like Imagine Dragons or something like that. But I know there are some people who really don't like them. The Head feels like a better version of what Coldplay had been attempting to capture on their previous venture, Parachutes. Coldplay has been criticized as peak mediocrity and for being monotonous, but I think that's an issue with their later works. In my opinion, this album executes ideas that could very easily become boring and mediocre, but in a way where it's really good. Very accessible, but good. Smashing Pumpkins as a whole, I find interesting. At 23 is Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, a fantastic alt-rock album that wasn't ruined by Billy Corgan's ego. This was an album in the period between Smashing Pumpkins' heavy inspiration from like shoegaze in the early 90s era and their heavy electronica inspiration in the late 90s and early 2000s. I think this makes a great medium. I also need to mention that this album is 28 songs long, clocking in at a length of 2 hours and 2 minutes. So I wouldn't exactly recommend just listening all the way through. Corgan also added more orchestral elements with tracks like Tonight Tonight. Overall, peak mid-90s alt-rock. July 6th, 5:04 p.m. It's been 3 weeks since I started the project, and I'm only halfway done. Therefore, I decided to split it in half, since I should probably put out at least something by this point. I have other things coming up, so expect at the earliest the part 2 to come out in late July, or at the latest early to mid-August, which I upload before then, but really I can't promise that since I work on this a lot. But thank you to my 12 subscribers, and I'll see you guys soon.